I do buy things to break them. There's a music store right up the street. I think most of their business is done online, and so they get a lot of like return stuff that was damaged in the transport. I mean, I have bought guitars up there. They have like a crack in them, but that's it for $5. I have all kinds of instruments just to shatter and break and bow and crunch and step through. I love it.
Welcome to The Practical Filmmaker, an educational podcast brought to you by the Filmmaker Institute and Sunscreen Film Festival, where industry professionals talk nuts and bolts and the steps they took to find their success today. On today's show, crime sonic extraordinaire Dan Brown Jr. takes us into designing the sound and music for the shows of true crime. Find the full transcripts and more at thepracticalfilmmaker.com. I'm your host, Tanya Musgrave, and today we have Dan Brown Jr., five-time regional Emmy Award-winning composer and sound producer at his company of Crime Sonics, a company dedicated to making the music, SFX, Foley, and police chatter of crime TV come to life. You've heard his sounds on Netflix, Hulu, network television, and more. Welcome to the show.
Yo. How you doing?
I'm doing well. So how did you get here? Tell me the story of how you ended up in a life of crime.
When I was young, I actually got in quite a bit of trouble. And so, when I'm looking at footage or I'm, writing with a scenario in mind, it's not something that I have to try to fantasize about. It's something that I had gone through as a young guy. So I know what it's like to lose my freedom. I know what it's like to be. We won't go into a whole lot of detail, but yeah, hung out with some rough kids, and that made a major impression on me as a young kid.
Okay, I was trying to be clever when I said, "Hey, like about your life of crime," but like I didn't know that there was an actual like personal connection.
Figured there was a life of crime.
Hey, you're not Crime Sonics, and so
It's interesting, I remember when I was in a detention home, and I was a young kid, and my probation officer came in and he said something. I remember because I was sitting in like this common area, and he sat down next to me and he said, "You don't belong here. But see these other kids, some of them do." And, one could argue, well, no, none of them belong there. Well, some of them did some really terrible stuff. I was hanging out with some bad kids doing some stuff. They didn't really do a whole lot. But what he was saying to me was, there's something special about you, dude. You don't belong here. And, I'll never forget that because he said that and I believed that. I believed it. And from that moment, like I had long hair at the time, and
Yeah.
I remember getting out of there and like, cut my hair for the first time. And like, it was neat. It only took one person to really look into you and speak into your life. So you don't belong here, dude.
Wow.
Pretty cool.
Wow. Do you feel like with your background, do you feel like this is pretty much your redemptive arc?
Maybe. I don't know. It's interesting. There is like all kinds of, fanaticism. If that's the right use of that word. Like there's, Crime Con, which is awesome. And we're going to hopefully be presenters at Crime Con. And it's all these wonderful people from around the world who are passionate about the true crime genre. But you got to kind of like juxtapose that to the real people who have experienced real crime. And so when people look at like me or Crime Sonics, I don't want them, or I hope they don't just think like these people are all about the crime. It's not about the crime. It's about the solving of the crime. It's about how, like what happened and how was it solved, or how is that case going? How is that investigation going? I'm very passionate about the process of solving it because these are real people who need real closure and deserve real justice. You grow up, you mature, you start finding your way in life. And I knew I was always going to work in music. I didn't necessarily know I was going to work in music for media until we lived in Denver, and I met a guy who scored a movie, an indie film. He said, "Dude, watch this indie film. I did all the music," and I watched it. And I was like, "Wow, I never thought about that. That's kind of cool." And it was like right in that moment, I knew, well, if I'm going to work on a film or some sort of project, it's got to be true crime. And, it's what I watch, it's what I consume, it's what I want.
All right.
And so I started seeking that stuff out. And it's hard to, it was hard to find that stuff in Denver. And so I moved out to Hollywood, and it was just with that goal in mind. Like, I'm going to figure out all the avenues and what it takes to write the music that you hear in the crime shows. So that's kind of how we're here.
Wow, interesting. Okay, so for indie filmmakers, I mean, like people who are kind of pulling themselves up by their bootstraps too, if they're just starting out and wanting to hire composers, like what should they expect? Like we're talking like what point in the process to get in touch, like price range, like expected turnaround time, like what's the process?
That's a super loaded question. It's super loaded. So I guess it kind of just depends on a couple of things. Talent attracts talent, and I also think like experience can attract experience. And so first, kind of knowing I'm talking to the filmmaker, knowing where you are in the process and where you are in your own experiences can dictate a little bit maybe of who you're going to hire, or maybe someone that's right in line where you are in your experience level, or maybe someone just a little bit above to kind of bring you along the way. So knowing where you are, having those honest conversations, and also knowing too, like composers, they're pretty artsy people at times, a lot of times,
Mm,
right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
so there's some things that you might want to consider. One being, can you speak the language of music, but not even in musical terms? Maybe like, do you
Mm,
feel confident like trying to convey like to a composer?
mm,
I want this kind of sound or this kind of tone or this kind of feel or this kind of emotion. You always hear like those stories about the director that comes to the composer and says, I want my movie to sound blue, like that kind of stuff. Like, we got to get past all of that stuff. I actually like, and most composers, I think they pretend that they don't like, is the temp score. And that's when you can
mm,
find pre-existing music, other music from another film
mm,
that
mhm,
is kind of the vibe of your film, or you'd like your film to sound somewhat like. I
mm,
actually like that because that immediately helps me understand the mind of the director.
mm,
Like now I know kind of like, okay, you put this music into your project. Now let's dialogue and let's talk about what do you like about that? And
mhm,
then you're going to start throwing out certain things. You're going to say, well, I really like the driving drums of that. I'm going
mhm,
to pocket that away.
yeah,
Or you'll say, like it's the string writing in this.
mhm,
And it might only have a little bit of string writing and all this other stuff, but that's what you pointed out. So now we're focused on what is it about the strings that you like. You also asked when to bring a composer in on the process. I can't speak for everyone. I can only tell you my experience. I like being involved as much as I can. Like I
mhm,
like the story. I like talking with directors and
mhm,
producers. Bring me in as early as possible. Just
mm.
let me get a vibe. What are you working on? Let me see stuff. I like it. You can bring me on as early as you want.
About what time frame is it to come up with an original score?
It depends on a few factors, and one being the style of music that's requested. It's quicker to write some ambient music than it is to write symphonic score, so that's going to dictate a lot of time.
Mm,
Budget, and then
mm,
the other thing would be the length of the piece. Is it a
mm.
short film? Is it an episodic television? Is it a full length feature? So
Yeah,
there's a
yeah.
lot of factors that play in. I heard another composer say, if I don't have enough time to do my best work, no matter how inspired by the project I am, I'll graciously bow out of it because I want to give my best as well. And that is unfortunate that a lot of times that composers are brought in late. It happens, but speaking from the composer standpoint, bring us on early. That
Mhm.
gives us time to massage things, move things around, and really experiment.
Is it something where, they would budget, kind of by the minute? Do you budget kind of like by the minute of just like, hey, this is going to take me a week and it's going to be around this much? This is going to take me a month, or, I could get this to you tomorrow
Yeah,
morning.
yes, no, it all depends. Every composer is different in how they structure their pay scale. I have a lot of other skill sets other than music, so I like to come on and like offer other things to the project as well, like the sound design or like overall mix or.
Ooh, yeah, yeah.
And so like, like I would and I'm, saying this on recording, so should I regret it? But sometimes I'll take a lower pay if
Mm,
I move into like an associate producer role,
mm.
stuff like that. And so it's kind of all over the map.
For wardrobe, I remember somebody saying that you need at least 3 textures, oh, you have leather, you have metal, and you have cotton or, what have you. Is there one aspect of music and sound that might actually like usually get swept under the rug by amateurs, but if you heard it, you'd say, now that's some good production music or, good sound?
Let me personalize it and talk about Crime Sonics specifically. Since
Yeah.
we do like one thing, but then we have all the subgenres of the one thing. So you can think like crime, investigatory, procedural drama. But real quick, so cybercrime doesn't sound like Southern justice. That doesn't sound like forensic science. Forensic science doesn't sound like 80s Chicago detective music, which doesn't sound like gumshoe sleuth, kind of music.
Wow.
So there's all these different sounds, right, that could be considered crime.
Yeah.
And so for internally, like we have a really strict bifurcation of our libraries. And when I'm working with our composers, I'm telling them like, they have reference material, they have like our pre-existing stuff. We'll do this kind of thing as we're doing now. I'll dialogue with them, kind of like bring them in, like really hone them in.
Yeah.
And so when the tracks come in, we have a weekly portal that our composers submit to. I bring them all into the DAW. I just put everything into Pro Tools. And the first thing I do is I look at it visually. And I'm looking at the WAV file. And if I see brick wall limiting or like the audio just looks like a brick and it's a block of, like a big block of cheddar cheese, I don't even listen to it. And it's immediately rejected. And it's usually permanently rejected.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I can tell right now that particular composer, if they're new, or that particular artist, they're not at a spot yet where they're even producing what could be usable. So I can't even next.
Yeah.
And then the next thing I look for is if I see, audio that looks good, is I'm looking with the video editing in mind, just visually. And this is before I ever hit the space bar to listen to the music. I'm looking to see, is there ebbs and flows, starts and stops, syncable moments, edit points in the music? Like if it's just a continuous musical thought and it's just like a big composition thrown on the screen, it's very, very difficult to edit with. So if I see something that looks like an interesting audio file and it's not clipping, I will then hit spacebar. This is where it gets a little tricky. I need to have immediate genre recognition, no ambiguity, immediately. If you submit to me a forensic science track, I want to hit spacebar and I'm in the lab. I'm watching DNA analysis. I'm watching luminol getting poured in. I see latex gloves. The music is tight, modern, sophisticated, glassy. It's sitting on the table and we are watching the forensic science process happen like immediately. And if I can't hear it immediately, it's probably not going to be a go. The next thing is if I hear that immediately, like, okay, we're in a forensic science track, I stop it. I scan right over to all the breaks and the stops. And I'm listening to how those moments like crescendo, break, leave space, come back in. Is it clean? I'm looking for really, really, really good production. It has to be the absolute best or I am passing on it. It is not a personal thing at all. Feelings do not matter. I'm not even going there. I'm looking at the track and is that commercially viable? Does that represent Crime Sonics? Does it sound like crime television? Is it clean? If it doesn't, it's got to go really fast. And then the other thing too is like I just throw this out there to composers if they're listening. It does not matter if you can write the most incredible, John Williams Star Wars sounding score if you can't produce it in a way that, for one, sounds realistic if it's not being recorded by a real orchestra. If it doesn't sound realistic, I can't use it. And I really shy away from, this is a personal framework that we work in. If it sounds like software, unless it's cybercrime, which kind of should, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear software strings. I don't want to hear software instruments. You can use them for us, but they need to sound amazing. You're always better if you're doing string writing. If you're going to use software, hire at least a violinist, the top line. So the top highest frequency that your ear is going to be drawn to, you hear it. It's emoted. It's a real musician who has listened to you, has looked at your music, and now is performing it in your your actual musical intention is being emoted, if that's a word, if I'm using that right, like into the
Yeah,
music.
yeah.
Like I think about like samples. It's just a moment in time that's captured, and you play the note, and it might have a few of the same note, but after a while, it's just the same note.
Mm,
And then to have a cellist use vibrato that's in time to the music, and it's playing and crescendoing, and it's
mm.
human and it's breathing. Software does not do that yet. I can tell you that much.
Yeah.
So yeah. So what am I looking for? Immediate genre recognition, incredible production,
Mm.
cleanliness. It's got to sound dope.
Yeah.
It's got to sound dope.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You just asked like the most important question ever to me, I think.
Yes. Well, okay.
Yes,
Well,
that is it.
you did mention a little bit more about your process, so I kind of want to dig into that a little bit more because
Mhm.
okay, so
Yeah.
do you have a certain process for hitting emotional beats, like working backwards, starting with like high points and, kind of picking out those, like this is when I need to hit something or, this is where I need to pull back. But, kind of using all of your life experience, but then also as a musician, hitting emotional beats. What's that process?
The spotting session with the directors and producers, that would be so crucial. You know your story. Let's pretend that it's your project. You know your story. If you wrote it, you know it. You know those characters. And it's so important for that story, your story, to get into my head and into my heart and into my soul. I need to know it. I need to know the characters and know the ins and the outs of this process, because all I want to do as a composer is serve it, right? Serve it emotionally, transparently, humbly. Like my ego's out of the way. Like I want to help tell your story. And so that initial process, we go through the project, that is you telling me and showing me, and I'm watching you, and you're talking about this character and this, and I'm making all these mental notes, or I got my laptop and I'm making like actual notes on the sheet, time code. And then while that's also going on, I'm also just paying attention to the visual. Great editing and great DP work is incredibly inspiring. It's its own symphony. It's its own music. And you probably experienced this too. Like great editing, it's got a tempo. Like even if there was not a click track in the edit, like it has a vibe.
Yeah.
And it's important that I know that vibe and see that vibe, and then like manifest that tempo like in the digital audio workstation in the DAW, right? So
Mhm.
that way I know, like, I got the click going, and we've figured out the tempo map from this hit point to this hit point. This thing's riding at about 100 beats per minute, and then from here to this hit point kind of ebbs and flows a little bit around, like, like 95 or up to 110 or something. So like physically mapping it out where you're hearing this against the edit and the dialogue, that's so crucial. Personally speaking, like that's the funnest part, because
Mm.
it's the technical part, and there's no stress yet of having to come in and write stuff. It's just figuring out the framework. Like it's very easy to play the game when you know the framework and you know all the rules.
Yeah. So is that the most fun part for you is like mapping that out or is it actually like is it okay, what's the hook for this one or is it like oh, actually playing the instruments cuz like you play a ton of instruments.
What is the funnest process? Honestly, the funnest process is when it's all done and it's all approved and we're finished. That is the best part of this. I'm really inspired by the criminal and investigatory content. I did a wonderful documentary just a couple of years ago now, which is crazy. Like that process from beginning to end was just wonderful. It was just wonderful. And the filmmakers were wonderful.
What made it that way?
I truly believed in the project. Like just it was about like systemic racism in the police force and criminal justice reform,
Mm.
and like Governor Gavin Newsom is in the project, and like it
Mm.
was pretty awesome.
Mm.
And I was the only Caucasian crew member, I think. Maybe there was a colorist who was a white girl. I was working with these wonderful African American filmmakers, and I felt honored to be a part of this thing that was like touchy. And this was like 2 or 3 years ago. Like things are so different even now, and so it was just really wonderful to be a part of it. And something that was important to me was, if we're gonna work on this thing and it's crimey, I also want to use sounds and colors that are from indigenous Africa. And it was just so cool, like to like learn about the history of African music and then
Mm,
try to pull sounds and instruments and use them into a modern score that also has like this crime kind of thing. It's just a
mm,
weird process, but let me tell you,
mm,
it's very rewarding. Still love that film. And it
mm.
screens all the time still, like all over the country, and just won some big awards, and it's awesome. Cool film. Walking While Black is a film. Walking While Black.
Oh, hey, wait.
Mhm.
No, yeah, I've seen that
Mhm.
doc around. Yeah, 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 for sure. So, like, one of the things that you do is help people or showrunners do is create a signature sound. Like we think of TED Talks and the water drop. Netflix is like
Yeah.
ta-dum, and like how do you approach designing a
Yeah.
signature sound for somebody? Just that sound.
Believe it or not, that comes from you. If it's it really does, because like when you are telling me about the project, let's say it's like a Southern Justice, Texas kind of thing. I already start thinking about sounds, like instruments,
Hmm.
and when you start telling me about emotion and tone,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm already thinking about instruments, I just need to use those instruments to create your emotion and tone.
Okay, what instruments? I've gotta know. I've gotta know what instruments come to mind right now when you say Southern
Well,
Justice.
Southern, yes, yeah, Southern jazz. Well, like on the wall you see back here, there's some Native American flutes. They have
Mm,
like a wood sound,
mm,
slide guitars, dulcimer. That
mm.
that Johnny Law kind of sound.
Okay, okay.
You know what I mean? Like shakers that are earthy,
Yeah.
not real like pretty, but like more rattly stuff like that. Stuff
Mhm.
that just has that really like Texas sound.
Yeah,
The
okay, okay.
high drums. I don't think I have any of those floating around in here.
For all of the sound effects that you use, for crimey type of things, I remember seeing
Yeah.
a picture and you were bowing a cymbal. I
Yep.
assume that it sounds creepy, but it just
Yep.
made me curious. Like, what is the most random instrument you've recorded, not how it was intended? Go.
Without offending instrument collectors, because I am also an instrument collector. I do buy things to break them. So there is there is there is a music store. There's a music store right up the street, and they have this. I think most of their business is done online, and so they get a lot of like return stuff that was damaged in the transport.
Okay.
And I mean, I have bought guitars up there. They have like a crack in them, but that's it for $5. I have
Oh,
all
dang.
kinds of instruments. I have purchased a ridiculous amount of instruments just to shatter and break and bow and crunch and step through. I love it.
Oh my stars. And
Yeah,
all
don't be
right.
offended.
My mom's a violinist, and so like I
Yeah,
I think of like her bow that I remember her telling me once that it was like specifically her bow that cost more than the actual violin itself.
yeah.
And so I'm just like I have like this holy respect for like crunching through any kind of instrument.
They sound so good when they break.
But what kind of situation would you use a sound like that?
Yeah, so like I'll give you a great example. Right now we have several thousand sound effects inside of Crime Sonics.
Okay.
And we have done like all of what you'd expect, like the big epic promo risers and the hits and the downers and all the stuff that you think.
Mm.
But since we are very crime focused, we also have things like vandalism sound effects,
Ah.
right?
Ah.
And so
Okay.
that was a fun process where we've in shattering glass. Here's a fun factoid: at the dollar store or the Dollar Tree, you can buy cups and plates for $1 a piece,
Huh.
and they all sound a little different when they shatter. And so we've gone up to the local dollar store on many occasions and bought $200 or $300 worth of plates and bowls and cups and pitchers, and
Uh,
we'll have boxes of glass, and then we
yeah.
bring it back,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we're just chucking it and throwing it, and then we have this mound of broken stuff in our
Uh,
garage or wherever we're recording, sometimes in the other room,
yeah.
and then we have a bunch of instruments that we bought, which are already half broke. So then we'll throw that stuff in there. And it
Wow.
becomes wonderful sound source material.
Mm.
You can layer this all together and start creating what we would call like the sounds of vandalism or the sounds of burglary or the sounds of destruction. Never a dull day. And I'll give you another great example. Okay. So we have coming out right now this guy. What is
Okay.
this guy?
Uh, oh,
That
oh my
is
stars.
a 7 million volt stun baton, right? We have several stun guns and stun batons and all
Oh
this
my,
stuff. And we order in the craziest stuff and sample it here in the studio.
wow.
Someone's getting tased on a cop show. I want them to use our sounds.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting, interesting, interesting. That actually segues really nicely into one of our listener questions. If you want to ask your listener questions, you can find us on Instagram at Practical Filmmaker. But one of them was, how do you store and present your sound library? I have a drive, but don't know how to start selling my sounds.
We were distributed globally by a sub publisher. I have recently ended that deal, and we are just now signing with another one. And
Mhm.
so, and but I won't say who yet because we got to sign a deal. So I would highly recommend that route. I won't say first, but I highly recommend that route because they
Mm,
will have pre-existing relationships with showrunners and producers and editors all around the world. And
mm,
so, how to get a deal like that, you gotta make something awesome. And now, having said that, you can go the other route and do like the e-commerce thing where you build your sound library and you can have like digital downloads. And so I would highly recommend Shopify.com
hmm.
because we run a whole second other business which I won't even talk about, and but we use Shopify digital downloads every day, and people use different type of content we create, and it's amazing. I wouldn't go it alone in the beginning. I wouldn't go it alone.
Okay, and we actually have one more listener question. What's the difference between a good mic and a bad mic, and does it matter much these days?
No, it really does. Yeah, it really does. I remember when I was young, I'm 38 at the time of this taping, and I remember I was recording at like 11 or 12. And I had like little $100 mics that you can get at a Guitar Center or something. And I vividly remember we'd try to record stuff and we'd listen to it back, and it just sounds awful. And then you're like tweaking and you're trying to like fix all the time, and you're like trying to do it with really nice microphones. The nicer the mic, really, the more they start acting like the ear, and they just start picking up the way things sound.
Hmm.
That is my ultimate goal. Is like when I'm recording anything, I want it to sound pretty much done, pretty much correct coming in. That
Hmm.
way, it's like it's very little corrective surgery on the audio. There's always anomalies. There's always weird stuff that happens. You're always kind of like looking around, but there shouldn't be like real sonic reconstructive surgery on what you've recorded. Probably did something wrong. So yeah, good. I highly recommend good mics. If you're going to ask me which mics, I'm a big fan of Neumann mics. We have a whole bunch of Neumann mics here in the studio. Those like they sound wonderful.
Wow, I used to work at a radio station in college. I have not heard that
Yeah,
name for like 10 years, I don't think.
yeah, they're really good.
We've been Facebook friends for a while, and every Friday I've
Yeah.
noticed that you always post, "How can I help?" What is the story behind that?
When I moved out to LA, no one helped me at all, really.
Mm,
And it was really difficult to figure this stuff all out. And I've not arrived at all. I'm still figuring this all out.
mm,
And I just remember, I was younger. I had a very young son, what hadn't been married that long. And being full disclosure, full transparency right here. Like I felt so lost and so scared and so nervous. Like, how am I going to figure all this out? It's such a big
mhm,
city. I don't want people to feel like that. I don't want people to feel the way that I felt. And if I can help anyone, I want to. You haven't said that, people do get a different version of me too, right? So like that person, I am that person. Like I do genuinely want to help people,
mm,
and that comes from a true heart. If you're working for me though, there's like such a high expectation. Like I really demand a high level of output.
yeah.
So I think there could be people too that are like, you don't seem that friendly when you work for them. And it's two different. Everybody has different facets of who they are.
You can still demand
I
excellence.
will never apologize for excellence or standards. Never.
Yeah, yeah.
Never. Our excellence does not care about your feelings. But yeah, I don't want people to feel lost or confused about our industry, or that they can't make it. A lot of my friends who were out here when I first moved here, they're all gone. They all like gave up. They're just somewhere else. Like
Mm,
I want I want to help
mhm.
people.
No, that's awesome. The more that I talk to artists and filmmakers and people in this industry, there's been like, one or two like pretty strong experiences that stand out for everybody when somebody helped them or
Mm.
when somebody was gracious enough to like give them a peek behind the curtain and say like, actually, these are my rates. I ran into this all the time in photography, and I respected more the people who freely gave that peek behind the curtain as opposed to saying, "Oh, well, you're my competition now, so like I can't."
Yeah, yeah, I get it.
I have a high respect for people who are mentors, the people who stress bringing and building other people up. I think that's really cool.
I think it's fun to watch other people grow and learn. I mean, I'm also a dad though, right? And so
Mm.
like what I mean, that's what you do as a dad. You're always like pouring into this other person and like
Mm-hmm.
trying to teach them. And so
Yeah.
like like the dad part of me doesn't shut off because I'm working, like my assistant in the other room right now, he's 10 years younger than I am. So
Mm.
I mean, the guy's still 28, he's almost 30,
Yeah.
but my son's in the other room. So when I'm talking to him, I know my son's hearing. And so it's like there's always a certain amount of like, check the ego at the door, stay committed to excellence, but also help people. There's nothing wrong with helping people. There's nothing wrong with it.
What current project are you excited about now?
It's cool to send an email to somebody who's like someone that you know and that you've like watched and you want be like, and you fire an email off and they immediately reply and go, no, I know exactly who you are, I've been watching what you're doing. Like, wow, okay, that's amazing. So I
Yeah.
can't answer that yet. Next question.
Okay, well then
Next question.
how do people follow along? Like how do people find you, follow your work? This is your time for your shameless plugs.
Oh, I love it. Well, a couple of them. First, the Clubhouse thing has just blown my mind. Yeah, that's like crazy. So that thing is going real well. And I
Mm.
just got on this whole Clubhouse app and we're getting like 100 follows a day on there. So that's pretty cool. So you can follow us there, just Crime Sonics. I'm on there.
Okay.
Crimesonics.com. We do have an Instagram, same thing. It's like at Crime Sonics.
Mm-hmm.
We have a Twitter. Funny thing about our Twitter, the only thing we ever tweet is funny, goofy, investigatory type jokes. So if you want cop dad jokes, that's the only thing we tweet, and there's a bunch of them. So go just scroll through because they're funny. They're always funny. That's it.
I would
Yep.
have never guessed.
Yep. So follow us on Twitter. Like it's a hidden gem. Like if I'm on the elliptical or I'm on a walk, I'm by myself. I'll like, let me search some
Okay.
funny cop joke. Yeah, go on there. Yeah,
No. I gotta look one up right now because
gotta go.
there's no, this just has to happen. Hold on
You
one
gotta do it.
second.
Yeah, and then we have a
Because
YouTube as well. But yeah, you have to follow the Twitter.
okay. The first one, a thief fell and broke his leg in wet cement. He became a hardened criminal.
And they're all that bad. Everyone,
Oh my God.
everyone
That
is
is
that bad.
horrible.
Oh, they're the worst. I take no credit for these jokes. I find these jokes on websites. If they're your jokes, they're all your jokes. We just
Oh my
repost them.
gosh.
You gotta read another one.
Oh my word. All right. Robber runs into a real estate agent's office and shouts, "Nobody move."
Oh man,
These are horrible. These are horrible, but they're so totally worth it. Okay.
Yeah. So if
All
you're
right.
bored later, just you're whatever.
On that note, what question should I have asked you?
How can you help me? Because I want to know how I can help you.
Hmm. Well,
So how can
consider
I
the
help
question.
you?
Yeah. Consider the question asked. All right. How can you help me? Man, I've never had that turned back
Yeah.
on to me.
Right. So that's what I have found in our industry. It's so interesting because we're so, and when I say we, it's many in our industry, be it the composers or directors or writers or whoever. We're all trying to get heard. We're all trying to, like sell ourselves. How can I help you? You don't have to answer that now, but that's something we can figure out. Like there's some way, like you
Yeah.
got a project coming up at some point in time,
Yeah.
you're going to need some help, and I want to help.
Now you've prepared me for any subsequent guests to throw that question back on me. I'm going to be like, oh, okay.
It's so good.
Well, I have appreciated your time that you've given us today. Thank you so much.
Always, anytime.
If you enjoyed this interview and are curious what Dan's favorite gear is, subscribe to our Patreon page, follow us right here, and check out more episodes at thepracticalfilmmaker.com. If you have comments or know someone who would be a great guest on our show, send in your suggestions to Tanya@thepracticalfilmmaker.com. Thanks for joining us. Be well and God bless. We'll see you next time on The Practical Filmmaker.